Hello, Horus Heresy fans. Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In today's episode, we're going to be talking all about psychic powers in the Horus Heresy, an Age of Darkness 2.0. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think psychic powers are cool. Psychic powers are one of the coolest things in Warhammer, and I still really fondly remember the days of playing with lots of cards for psychic powers, back playing Warhammer 40k 2nd edition, and also similar for Fantasy Battle, with Winds of Magic and all those different kinds of cards as well. All those expansions, generally some of the best that Games Workshop ever did, and psychic powers are just awesome. Now, they've changed quite a lot over the years on lots of different editions, and they've gotten more and more streamlined the way that psychic powers are represented in the game, and I think nowhere is that more evident than the new Horus Heresy rules. So psychic powers in the new Horus Heresy are super streamlined, and on the one hand, that's a little bit of a shame because I would have loved to see lots of cards, but on the other hand, it does make it nice and friendly, and it does give them the opportunity to really use the powers that they do have, the rules they do have, to really represent something awesome, and I think they've done a good job at that. So let's have a little chat about how psychic powers work in the new Horus Heresy edition. So, all powers are cast with a psychic roll, regardless of source. There's all different types of psychic power in the game now, so all you do is you take a leadership test. You don't get any of your bonuses or anything on that if you've got them. You just take a leadership test. Now, generally, most Psykers are characters, so generally consuls, so they've got leadership 9. So you're not going to fail these very often. And it does look like, from my read through the rules, that modifiers like fear and things like that also don't affect psychic powers, although that rules are a little bit weirdly written, so I could certainly see that being FAQ'd, and maybe fear will be a slightly good anti-psycho power, who knows. So all powers are cast with leadership test, dead easy. Most guys do it on leadership 9, which means the majority of the time you're going to pass your psychic roll and your power is going to work. But if you don't, you suffer perils of the warp, which means you take D3 wounds automatically, against which you can take only invulnerable saves and damage mitigation rolls. So you can mitigate this damage, and most heroes will have a way of doing that, and you don't take too much damage. But on the other hand, D3 wounds is quite a lot, because most of these consuls who are going to be librarians have only got 2 wounds, so it's very possible that if you do fail a psychic check, the guy is going to get eaten. So that's a thing to bear in mind when you're thinking about using your psychic powers. Right, so you can use any number of psychic powers per turn. There's no limits to the number of psychic powers. They're sort of just like special rules now, so if you've got it, you can choose to use it. Now, most of them you won't always want to use, necessarily, partly because of perils, partly because they're not always relevant, but you can use any that you have. So if you have access to multiple sources of psychic powers, like Thousand Suns psychic powers, or multiple disciplines, which we'll get onto in a bit, you can use all of them in a turn, in theory, as well. So the way psychic powers work is you choose a discipline, or in some cases your characters already have a discipline or multiple disciplines, and that discipline gives you a power and also an attack. And the attack generally is a shooting or melee attack, and generally that will mean it's an alternate to whatever the character's equipped with, so you can choose whether to use it or not. And also you've got a power which is just used at a specific time, so each power will say use this in the phase, whatever phase it is. So that's how they generally work. Psykers also have psychic weapons, force weapons, as we all know, which is yet another psychic check. Force on a weapon lets you take a psychic check to double the strength of the weapon, which effectively, in most cases, would generally make it an instant death weapon, and also mean that you're, pretty good at damaging heavier targets as well. And then last of all, when you choose a discipline, you also get access to one basic psychic power as well, which is Warp Lightning, so we'll talk about that in a sec too. Psykers are generally librarians, which is a 45-point upgrade for a consul. So that's how you mostly get access to Psykers in Space Marine armies. So that means the base cost of bringing a Psyker is 105 points before you give them any additional equipment. Now, different legions do have access to different ways to get Psykers as well. For example, Thousand Suns can make any character a Psyker for 15 points, which gets them cheaper access to Psykers. And there are some units in the game which are Psykers as well. again, mostly Thousand Suns units, and generally the way they've represented that this edition is the unit leader will be the Psyker for the most part, which does mean you can snipe them out of units and that kind of stuff as well. Generally, if you're going to bring a Psychic Power, it's going to cost you 105 points for a Librarian. That's the way you will normally get them. So let's have a talk about the disciplines. There are a number of core disciplines in the book, and when you choose a Librarian, you choose a discipline and you get access to that discipline. So there are Biomancy, Divination, Pyromancy, Telekinesis, Telepathy, and Thaumaturgy. So there's 6. There is also some chapters that get their own, such as Salamanders or Wordbearers get their own disciplines as well, which can do different things, but we're just going to talk about the core ones. So I mentioned earlier Warp Lightning. Everybody gets the Warp Lightning power. It's a psychic weapon. It's Strength 3 AP 4, Assault 4 Force, range 18 inches. So not a very good gun, but obviously you're going to want to take a psychic check with it, so you can choose not to, but if you do, it will make it Strength 6 with Force. So you got an Assault 4, Strength 6 AP 4 gun at range 18. Not very good, but gives your Psyker probably a slightly better gun than they would ordinarily be armed with, unless you've paid to upgrade them to a pistol. Now let's get into the disciplines. So Biomancy. So Biomancy is probably one of my favourite old disciplines. I remember the days of Space Marine Librarians tooling themselves up with a bunch of Biomancy powers and then just going into melee and having fights and tearing things to bits. It was really great. So let's see how they've chosen to represent that in Heresy. So the psychic power is Biomantic Augmentation. So they manipulate biological energy to make things stronger and tougher. So instead of making a shooting attack, you can choose a friendly unit within 6 inches and it gets +1 strength for the rest of the turn. Great power. Doesn't need a psychic test, but if you do choose to do a psychic test, the unit also gets +1 toughness, which is really, really good. So for the psychic power, any unit within 6 inches, and that could be the Psyker and a unit that he's joined as well, +1 strength and toughness. Absolutely fabulous for an assault unit. You think of some of these Terminator units going up to toughness 5, makes them immune to the instant death abilities of other Terminators. Also means if you've got a Power Axe, for example, which is a really good AP2 weapon, where you would normally be wounding other Marines on a 3, you'll now be wounding them on a 2. So this is a really, really good power. The psychic weapon that comes with this is Biomancer's Rage. So this is like an amalgamation of all those cool Biomancy powers I was talking about. Just turns the Psyker into a monster in combat, and he tears things apart with his hands, pretty much. And it's a psychic weapon, so you have to make a psychic test to use it. If you fail, you take perils of the war, but you can still attack as normal. And that's how most of these weapons work, actually. You can still attack as normal if you fail after your perils, if it doesn't kill you. So this is Strength 10, AP 4, and it's Rending 4+. So pretty much you've got the equivalent of sort of like a Power Fist, but even better. But it's, Rending 4+, which means you are still going to get that high AP half of the time when you wound things, but it strikes at full initiative. So this is a pretty good weapon, really. I think particularly if you've given your Psyker like a Force Axe, for example. So you've got the option to either guarantee your AP2 and strike later in the combat, or you can use Biomancer's Rage and go earlier in the combat, but not necessarily get your AP2 is a really great option, for example. So this isn't something you're going to use all the time. You're going to be a Biomancer probably for the first power, which is really good, but this is also a great option to take on your Psyker as well, in a melee if you're fighting one. Next is the Divination discipline. So this is also cool. So instead of making a shooting attack, Psyker with this power can select a friendly unit within 12. It gains precision strikes and precision shots 6+, which is okay. Bit hard to pull off maybe, but a lot of the time, if there's a full unit shooting, you actually do only need one of them to get a precise shot to take out an enemy heavy weapon or something, so not too bad. But if you take the psychic check for this test, it turns into a 5. So it does mean that you're very likely, particularly with a unit of, say, melter guns, plasma guns, missile launchers, whatever, to be able to put some of them shots onto things you want in the unit. So that's a really good power if you're going to be supporting things with a shooty Psyker. And he comes with a psychic weapon called Diviner's Dart, which is Strength 6, AP 2. Great stats that we like to see. It's Assault 1 and 18-inch range, so quite short, but it's Sniper, which means, again, you're going to be able to pick your targets with that, and it's got a great stat line for killing Marines. It's also got guided fire, so you can shoot it out of line of sight, which is interesting with an 18-inch range weapon as well. So, and you have to take a psychic test to use that, so that's also cool. So Divination, really interesting discipline, nice support power, great for sticking with a unit of decent guns, I think is probably the way you're going to use that mostly. Next one is Pyromancy. So this one is obviously setting things on fire. Now I love the way they've built this discipline. Rather than just kind of shooting firebolts at single targets, it really evokes the feeling of setting absolutely everything on fire, as you would expect with Pyromaniacs. So instead of making a shooting attack, you can place a large 5-inch blast marker anywhere on the battlefield, entirely within 18 and line of sight to the Psyker, and then it scatters D6. Now, it counts as difficult terrain, it stays on the board, and anything under it or that moves through it takes a Strength 6 AP4 hit. So not the most powerful hit in the world, particularly when you're talking about power armored Marines, but it's a blast. But if you take the Psychic check, you do 3 of those. And if they overlap, things do get hit multiple times as well. So in theory, you could put 3 of them on top of a unit and, you know, do tons and tons of Strength 6 hits on a unit. Or you can spread them out a little bit more and make lots of that difficult terrain. Really interesting power, does a couple of different things, and I think this is really good. You can wall off an area, make it difficult, and if people walk through it, they're going to take hits. You know, what do people do in that situation? Do they just stand there? Do they go through it and take the pain? That's quite a cool power, and is useful as well. And then the other thing they've got is Pyromantic Desolation, which is a melee weapon. So it's Strength 6 AP3 unwieldy. So you do your attacks at Strength 6 AP3, which is an okay profile. But at the end of the attack, when the Psyker goes, so not the end of the phase, at the end of the attack when the Psyker goes, you put a 3-inch blast marker on yourself as well. And all of the models under it automatically take a hit with the same profile again as well. Now that includes friends. So this is quite interesting. So you're really going to have to get your Psyker right into the middle of a unit, pop this off, and you're just going to do a bunch of Strength 6 AP3 attacks. So really good for maybe taking out enemy Marines, less good for taking out tough targets, but you really don't want to be with a bunch of friends when you do this because you're going to hit them too. So I think this discipline may very cool, maybe a bit less good than the previous two, but if you take it, you're really taking it for those blast templates, which I do think is great. The psychic weapon a bit harder to use. And the next one is Telekinesis. So Telekinesis is, the psychic power is called Telekine Dome. So instead of moving, the Psyker can activate this psychic power. So all friendly models within 8, so models within 8 of the Psyker get a 6+ invulnerable save, unless the shooter is also within 8. So this represents a telekinetic dome and bullets bouncing off it when they're being fired into it. But if someone gets inside the dome, they're not going to be affected by it. But if you take a psychic test, that goes up to a 4+ invulnerable save, which is like massive. So you can have a guy casting this Telekine Dome, given all of your maybe Marines that are standing around with heavy weapons at the back of the battlefield where the opponent's not going to get into that bubble easily, all a 4+ invulnerable save. It's just really, really good. Now, obviously, sometimes you might want to use cover instead of that, so you might not want to do this, but this does let you sort of just set up, plonk yourself in the open and sit there under the Telekine Dome, and 8 inches is quite a big bubble, so you can easily get, you know, multiple units under that as well. So this is really cool. It does stop the guy from moving though, so you're not going to be advancing up the battlefield with this. Maybe if you set him up on the edge of your deployment zone, you'll get some units will get to walk forward like once and still be in the bubble. But really cool psychic power and really powerful if you use it well. And then they have a ranged attack for their psychic weapon as well. Strength 8 AP4, Sunder, and Blast 3. And again, you've got to take a psychic power to use it. Range 24. So that's interesting. Not the most powerful gunshot, but certainly capable of, you know, taking a wound off a vehicle. You know, maybe something like a Predator or something like that. Or if there are more Armor 4 things around in the game, maybe when Mechanicum come out, that little Blast 3 might catch multiple things. But this works with, you know, the Telekinesis Psycho wants to hang back so people can't get into his bubble. And this gives him a ranged attack to use. And it's certainly better than the ranged attack you would normally have on a Psyker at this point. So it's a nice thing to have as well. Then we've got Telepathy. So once a turn, start of any phase, Psyker can take a psychic check. An enemy unit within 24 can't make reactions for the duration of this phase. Now, this, I think, is very big. I think this is like quite a big deal. I think lots of people want to use this. Some of the reactions in the game are really, really good. For example, return fire. If you got a unit of heavy marines, heavy support marines with like a lot of last cannons or missile launchers or something like Iron Tyrant Terminators, for example, and you try to shoot that unit's just going to obliterate your unit in reaction. And reactions are going to be a really big part of this game. And the ability to just turn it off at range 24 is really, really good. Likewise, if you've got a unit that wants to charge, but someone might overwatch, someone overwatch you with a bunch of melter guns as your Terminators are charging in, that's also not a thing you want. So turning off reactions, again, quite a big deal. I think this is going to be super popular for that, but also because of its psychic weapon as well, which is also very good. So range 36, which is huge. It's assault 6. It doesn't do any damage or anything like that. So what happens is when you do any hits with this, you've got to take a pinning test with the unit that's been hit, but the pinning test adds 1 to the test for every hit you've got beyond the first. For every hit, so even the first one as well. And that's good because similarly to the power, when things are pinned, they can't make a reaction, but also they can't do anything in their own turn either. Now, pinning normally needs a leadership test, and most things will generally pass an unmodified leadership test. But this, it's going to be on a Psycho Whip BS2, so with 6 dice, he's probably going to hit 5. So your average Marine unit is going to need to roll a 4 or under on a leadership test to pass this pinning test. So this is like going to pin something every turn. So between that and the telepathic fugue psychic power, that's 2 units you can turn reactions off every turn. Now this is obviously very powerful, much more powerful than the other disciplines, and I think you will see quite a lot of this. Quite a lot of these around, particularly in armies where people want to win. I think telepathic psychers will be very powerful, and we'll see that around quite a lot, most probably. The last one is Thaumaturgy. Now this is a bit weird, this discipline, and I am looking at the playtest rules recording this, so there is a small chance these have changed for release, but we'll see. So the power is called Thaumaturgic Succor. So instead of making shoot and attack, you pick a friendly enemy unit within 12. Every model in the unit rolls a dice on a 5 up, they regain a wound. And that's pretty poor, so you've got to make the psychic test. Then they need to get a 5 to get 1 wound back. And it says every model, but because of the way wound allocation works, only 1 model will generally be wounded at a time anyway. So this is like really, really super weak. And I'm really hoping this is changed for release. But right now, not very good. And then the psychic weapon is actually decent, though. It's Strength 4 AP3 template. And it's Sanctic, so it always wounds demons on a 2 and makes them reroll their invulnerable saves as well. It's also Psychic Focus, so when you hit corrupted things, if you don't know, corrupted things, when they take damage from a Psychic Focus weapon, they get instant death as well. So this is really all about killing demons. It's actually not bad at killing Marines either. An AP3 template with Strength 4 is pretty good at killing Marines, and I think if you take this power, you're mostly taking it for that template weapon, but I do think there are other better disciplines that are also cooler as well. Telepathy, Pyromancy, or the Biomancy are all like very cool to me. Thaumaturgy, much less so. So there you go. There's a walkthrough of what all the psychic disciplines do. Some of them certainly more powerful than others. All of them, with the exception of Thaumaturgy, I think, all of them are great. Even though each one of them's only got 2 powers, they have managed to capture the most important bits of those disciplines, I think, and so those Psykers can really feel like they are the Psykers that are doing the thing that you want them to do. And I think you will see these show up in a lot of armies. I think they really should, because they're cool. I think most people are going to take at least 1, and you should, because I'm just going to say it again, they're cool. Psychic powers are great. So I hope that's given you some ideas of what you can do with the psychic powers, and if you didn't know what psychic powers did, I hope that's given you a little idea of how they work. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please do drop me a comment, a like, a subscribe. It all really helps, lets me know that you're enjoying the content, gives me lots of motivation to carry on doing all these YouTube videos. Now, who better to close us out with a quote from an episode about Psykers than Magnus the Red? And Magnus said, "If I'm guilty of anything, it's the pursuit of knowledge." Because as we all know, Magnus did nothing wrong. Bye-bye.